So when we look at Syria and we look at what the president said and did this week, you may say, who is that guy? He certainly has had a change of heart when it comes to Syria. A few years ago, here's what some of his tweets had to say on the very subject. President Obama, do not attack Syria. There's no upside and tremendous downside. Save your powder for another and more important day. Again, to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen, and from that fight, the U.S. gets nothing. The president must get congressional approval before attacking Syria. Big mistake if he does not. Well, interestingly, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, and a fellow Republican, he agrees at least with that last point from the Donald. Take a listen.
My first concern is this is why we should have a deliberate discussion. This is why this should originate in Congress. This is why our founding fathers said under the Constitution that war should be debated fully by Congress, initiated and declared by Congress, but the president really doesn't have the authority under the Constitution to initiate war. And so I think what we're doing now is illegal and unconstitutional.
But President Trump says he had a sudden change of heart after seeing these horrific images of kids who were attacked by those chemical weapons. Here's what he had to say last night.
My fellow Americans, on Tuesday, Syrian dictator Bashar Al-Assad launched a horrible chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians. Using a deadly nerve agent, Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death for so many. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack.
Let's bring in our panel for this. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent. And Richard St. Paul, Republican strategist and former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. I want to play a bite here. And this was the president not 2 years ago. This is the president this week sharing what his worldview is and what he believes as commander-in-chief his priorities are. Take a listen.
I'm not, and I don't want to be, the president of the world. I'm the president of the United States.
Richard, did that just change last night?
No, look, I think that we all...
I'm not even saying he did anything right or wrong, but I'm saying his worldview has always been America first. I don't even want to be part of NATO, maybe until, I'm not the president of the world, not my problem. I read his comments to Trump. Did that just change yesterday?
Not at all. Look, here you have chemical weapons being used. We do have American soldiers in the area and some on the ground in Syria.
This isn't the first time they've used them.
Understood. And that was under Obama, and Obama didn't
he told him, don't do it.
Obama didn't take any particular action.
Absolutely. And I criticized him on this very show.
He was going
to. But Trump said, and I'm not even here to bang on Trump, okay? But he said at the time, and I read his words, don't do it. No upside. It'll only get worse. You get dragged into something bigger, not in America's interest. He then did what he did. He put out his surrogates today and said there might be more. My point is, did we just see a 180 in the worldview of the president? Because if we didn't, why didn't he just say, I'm going to stick to my position before, terrible, bad thing, but not America's problem?
No, he did not. You saw him protecting American interests abroad. The use of chemical weapons, whether against civilians or military, should not be allowed. And if we allow Bashar to use chemical weapons against his own people, then what's stopping him using it against our troops or even our people?
No delivery system?
We have a delivery system. How did those people
reach us?
No, we have troops in the area, and we also have friendly countries in the area like Israel, Saudi Arabia. And
you were talking about the United States.
Andrew,
no, but those are our interests, are vested abroad
let's
too.
Let's be clear. As I talked about with the congressman last segment, Republican and Democratic presidents alike, and Republican and Democratic Congresses in every administration, they're always take issue with use of power. So let's not even debate as to whether or not he should or shouldn't have gone to Congress for the authorization to do those strikes. I happen to think what he did last night was a good thing, not a bad thing for what he did to Assad. And I wish Obama did that when confronted with the same situation. My point, though, is I don't know what he wants and how he views our role in the world. I'm more confused today than I was a week ago. And you and I both know there's two different theories. There's the madman theory, which is nobody knows what you're going to do next, including your enemies, and that will give them pause, i.e. North Korea, before they do something next. And then there's the other thing, which is you really are a madman. You don't know what you're going to do. Which one do you think it is?
I'm not willing to say he's a madman, but I don't think he knows what he's doing, or I don't think he has a plan set up. First of all, whether he's not the president of the United States, he's not the president of the world. He hasn't changed his theme to answer your previous question. He's the president of Donald Trump. And so he's always doing what's in the best interest of Donald Trump.
Fair enough, but his actions yesterday
I
interjected himself
understand
on the
that,
world landscape.
but he did that for the best interest of Donald Trump, not for the best interest of the United States or the Syrian people or those little children who he says moves him so much that he felt compelled to take this action, even though he won't let them into the United States.
But can't you say the same thing when Obama took action against Libya?
Yeah.
Well, what's the distinction with the difference here? Every commander-in-chief, in the end, has to make a decision, in our histories, always men, what his line is. And he did it last night. My only point is, does this change going forward where our footprint is in the Middle East and where we now have to get involved if somebody does something else?
No, I think it's entirely capricious. I think it will change depending on the headlines, depending on the way the winds blow, and depending on what's the prudent thing to do at that moment, particularly in the interest of Donald Trump. And look, we haven't made this point yet, but the Trump administration is to a certain degree responsible for the chemical attack. It was Tillerson and it was Haley's statements last week that gave Assad the breathing room.
Remind people what they said.
Tillerson went out and said, Assad's fate will be left up to the Syrian people. It ended our policy of pushing for regime change. No, we didn't push particularly hard and we didn't take any military action to try to get regime change. But for the first time since the civil war in Syria began, we said it's up to the Syrians what to do with Assad. Well, what do you think Assad did? He read into that the U.S. isn't going to take any action, isn't getting involved. We can do what we will. It's not a coincidence that within a week of those statements, he's dropping chemical weapons on his people.
And you know, I want to read the statement. I want to read the statement here from Russia in the aftermath of the attacks last night. Vladimir Putin believes, this obviously distributed from the Soviets, that the complete disregard for factual information about the use by terrorists of chemical weapons drastically aggravates the situation. This move by Washington has dealt a serious blow to Russian-U.S. relations, which are already in a poor state. You can add on to this, Dominic, that there are reports right now that there are some who believe that the Russians either aided or were, I think to use Tillerson's thing, ignorant of what was going on. In that, they controlled the airspaces and they controlled certainly the airfield, so they would have known who's going up and down. Because of that, they clearly knew that aircraft was being put in the air by the Syrian military that had chemical weapons on it. Moreover, there's now allegations, unproven to this point, that the Russians may have bombed the hospital that these chemical weapons victims were being brought to as an attempt to basically cover up the evidence that they were being used. This gets complicated. We all made jokes here, I think fair jokes at that, and I don't think yesterday's changed everything, that Putin either has got photos of Trump or something, because I can't understand their relationship to this point. This complicates it now going forward.
I don't joke about that, Richard. I really believe that there's something there. So it's not a joke.
Let's say there was something that compromised at least how Trump would have viewed Putin versus anyone else, because it certainly on the face seemed like it. Yet the language his surrogates, including the Secretary of State and the UN ambassador, that they've been using about Russia today and in the recent days, and the action we took, clearly says something's different with Russia right now.
Well, I wouldn't jump that far. I would say that perhaps this has been choreographed. We don't know what's being communicated with Russia via backdoor channels. In other words, we don't know if this is a show, a public display. But I will say this, Richard. Come on, let's just look through this for what it is. Remember when Bill Clinton was facing a lot of headlines right before impeachment? I forgot which country he bombed. Remember that? And he took a lot of heat for it was a smoke screen to get away from the headline. Look at what Trump did on the first day of the kids in terms of the Assad and the bombing. He issued a statement. He had a speech that night, did not say a word. That's the same night he said he does not want to be the president of the
claim,
world.
though, Dominic, they claim, and I'm not even ready to dismiss it, that once the video was shown about the children, listen, you know what? Nobody's been a bigger critic of him than me. I'm going to withhold judgment as to his motivations to this point. We'll see.
Again, the children that he won't let into the United States?
Yes, fair enough.
Okay.
And a legitimate point. Richard, though,
well,
you have
not
an
exactly.
interesting
They'd be
perspective.
Syrian
No,
refugees.
you can't debate that.
They'd be
But I'll
Syrian
give you another
refugees.
question.
And it's a temporary restriction on travel. And those that are already in process before
You know, I was going to let you get by
restrictions-
this, and you chose to grab the shovel. Okay, my friend, I have a different point. When I was going through the biggest criticisms of what we did last night, they were coming from conservative circles. They were saying, people like, time out a minute here. Those who were from not just the Alex Jones and the folks with the tinfoil hats and all the rest, okay, but conservatives like Rand Paul and the rest who said, wait a minute, first of all, you said you were going to come to us. You said you weren't going to be like Obama and use unilateral, basically, authority without getting congressional approval. But beyond that, they said, I thought we were America first. What happened to the populist platform here where we weren't going to go on these escapades in their worlds into trouble in hot spots around the world? What about spending all of our, treasure and no more spilt blood, but put it over here, America first? I can't tell you, Richard, how many conservative think tanks have been saying that, how many talking heads, radio and otherwise, and even members of Congress who have been really critical of this. They feel there's been an abandonment by the president. I don't know how the poll number to put on this or anything else, but it is an issue. Some of the people who helped get him elected, they did it on the promise that he would basically hunker down on the continental U.S.
Well, look, here's what happens. The president was elected overwhelmingly by people of this country. He has
No, he was voted by less than half of them, but keep going. It's a good story. I'm sorry.
Didn't win the most.
We're not talking about the popular. We're talking about the electoral.
Okay. You gotta give that
The
caveat.
electoral
Okay,
college, the one that
There you go. Yeah. Sorry.
overwhelmingly. Okay, back to what I
got
said.
enough to win.
He has presidential powers. He's executed his presidential powers, and it all look. He has more information on the planet than any member of Congress about what's taking place in the world. Okay, based upon that information, he has to act. That's why he has that
That's not my
ability to do
question.
that.
Would you
But I'm
stop
telling you,
spinning? My
I'm just
God.
telling you why he doesn't need to go to Congress to do that.
Fine. Let's get to the second point, though. The conservatives who said, I'm with you, Donald. I don't want to go around the world anymore like Bush and like Obama and the rest. I want to worry about the U.S.
America first.
I want to do what you promised me on the campaign trail and you criticized the last president, that no more of this stuff. Last night he did it, and his surrogates and him said there could be more to come. Conservatives, forget about anybody else. They're saying that's not what we signed up for.
Look, America first. That's right. That's the platform he rode into the White House on. And look, America first does include protecting our interests abroad. And we can't have people using chemical weapons abroad just the way they want to use them. That's just not something that we want to do.
So Andrew, now I give you a scenario.
America first is the same as non-America.
Okay, now I give you a scenario which is,
Protecting interests abroad.
let's say in Egypt, the evidence turns up of genocide by another strongman, Sisi, who you just met with. Have we set a new standard? To your point earlier, you said that it's all, if not transactional, it's all off the cuff and one day here, the next day there. But in a certain way, aren't you you have to have a coherent foreign policy.
Are you?
Are we
you're
having
really
one
looking
now?
for a doctrine out of this White House?
It's not me. People are saying, where do we stand next?
I don't think there is one. I really don't. And it'll be. I think that all of these decisions are going to get made on a case-by-case basis, depending on how much press it gets, what the mood of the country is, what people seem to suggest might be the prudent thing to do. Is there a demand or a call for action? I think these things are all going to be on a case-by-case basis. But here's what I worry about. Trump got a lot of positive press for what he did last night. It's not really that effective. I mean, the airstrip that we bombed is already being used by the Syrians today. So it didn't
there's
even.
4 other ones beyond this one.
But it didn't even cripple the airstrip for more than 16 hours. And you're going to start hearing about increased problems inside Syria. I wonder if we're going to wind up with a failure in the long term, but a short-term success that will then encourage this president to do this more.
It'll be a glucose, like a sugar high here he'll get off of it. Okay.